Welcome to episode 155 of Destination Linux. This is a podcast about using, learning and sharing our passion for Linux and open source. Whether you're a new user or a master sudoer, welcome. I'm Zeb, and with me today are the witches of Linux, Ryan, Noah and Michael. So Noah, what spells have you been casting this week?
You know, I have been casting the spells of Raspberry Pis. I've been playing with a lot of various different things.
Nice.
I actually found somebody made a viewer that basically pulls individual RTSP streams and can pull them all together and then multiplex them. And you can do this on a Raspberry Pi. So you can basically make a little viewing station for any of your camera systems out of a Raspberry Pi. So we'll have a link for that. It's a pretty cool thing. And like the thing that I love about it is stuff that doesn't exist in the commercial IP realm for any amount of money exists on Raspberry Pis in the open source community because somebody went, hey, you know what? This is something we need, and the best tool to use this would be a Raspberry Pi.
And at $35 for the Pi 4, it's ridiculously cheap compared to commercially made systems. It's fantastic.
That's exactly right.
So Ryan, what have you been up to, my friend?
So this week, I finally got around to releasing my video on Manjaro ARM edition on the Pinebook Pro, and it has received a ridiculous reception, which was fantastic. Manjaro and Pine64 and others retweeted, commented on it. It's really nice to see people get so excited about that video, and really just showing the alternate operating systems that you could put on the Pinebook Pro, which goes to one of its coolest features is people like you, Zeb, who are distro hopper. In this one, you can just burn the operating system onto the micro SD card, plug it in, and actually run it, the full operating system, and install your files and everything on the micro SD card. Then when you want to go back to the customized Debian that it came with, you unplug the micro SD card, repower it on, and boom, it's right
away
back
you
in
go.
there. Yep.
Awesome.
So it's a pretty awesome thing, and appreciate everybody checking out that video and giving it some love.
Great stuff. Michael, what's new in your world?
Well, I actually went to a local lug this past week, and it was really interesting because we had 3 different presentations at the lug, and one of them was on PowerShell. The other ones were on Apache Guacamole, which is fun because I knew that this application existed, but I never really tested it. I just knew it existed because how fun the name is. And we also did a presentation on OBS, and that was my presentation. And afterwards, the month before, we actually did I did a presentation on Kdenlive and how I did DL. And after the OBS one, they saw all the scenes that everybody gives me a hard time on this show about. And then after that was done, they were saying like I should make all of you sit down and watch me edit the show and how everything works. That way you'd stop trolling me on it.
Or
it would make it worse.
Right. I told them that there would be no possible way to stop the trolling because, Noah, Ryan, and Zeb, that's what they live for. Other than Noah's bubbly is also something that he lives for.
Also correct.
Yes. So anyway, I just showed them how great my OBS scenes are, and they all agreed that it's fantastic. So that's fantastic.
How many? Just to be clear,
there was like 12 or so.
This is the lug where you guys talked about PowerShell. Those guys were impressed with your OBS scene.
Well, one person did a presentation about PowerShell, and actually it was an interesting presentation.
Let me ask you something.
It was interesting.
On your presentation on Kdenlive, did you do that one on Windows or?
No, because Kdenlive doesn't really work on Windows, so
yes,
it doesn't really. It doesn't really.
I just got confused because of the whole self-presentation.
There's a port. That's what? That was your fault, sir. And I did. Yes, it was.
Media that year.
Yes, it was.
Was not.
Well, it doesn't matter if that's true or not. I'm pretending that it's true. So this is how the trolls work on this show. What are you talking about?
I didn't say it was your fault. I said I'm blaming you.
I know, but I'm blaming you because whether it's your fault or not, it doesn't matter. And to be fair, the first time that first self presentation was on a Chromebook. Thank you. That's why it was weird.
But you started on Windows.
No, Self wanted me to use Windows apparently.
Yeah,
and he's deliberately not mentioned that the thing that got the most attention was the stool.
Yeah.
No.
In fact, if people want to join the stool lug, how do they get information?
How do they join? How do they get there?
Stoollug.com?
That is not a thing. It's destinationlinux.org/telegram. That's how you join the stool lug, apparently.
That's a weird
fantastic.
That's a weird, strange name for your stool support.
And for those who don't know, UBports has released and I'm not joking here, a stool app out
Mhm.
there. So if you are
This is great.
interested in inspiration of Michael, they've created a stool app on the UB ports. So go check
Yeah.
that out.
It
Sure.
has excellent reviews from what I understand.
Yeah. And Zeb, how has your week been?
Well, I've been testing Fedora 31 and didn't have a very good time of it, unfortunately, with the net install version.
Oh
I
no.
tried both Plasma and XFCE, and they just didn't feel right. You know, when you install something and you reboot it and it's like, meh, something's not feeling right. So I thought, okay, let's wipe all those and let's go for the basic Fedora XFCE ISO. And boy, what a difference. Instantly back to that slick Fedora feeling, added the RPM fusion. I did the usual NVIDIA multimedia codec jig, and everything's now chickadee boo.
That's interesting. So you tried Endeavor Net Installer last week. You loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Fedora Net Installer didn't like it. It just felt weird.
Yeah, I don't know whether I'd chosen the wrong components, because what confuses me is you pick that you want to do XFCE, and then up on this right-hand side is then a whole host of programs that you're meant to select. And I never know what I'm meant to select and what I'm not, because I've tried selecting them all before and the whole thing just went poof and didn't work at all. So this time I
Gotcha.
selected nothing. Got into Fedora and it's like, oh, I haven't got web browser. Okay, sudo DNF install Firefox. So it's not really, for me, intuitive what you are or are not supposed to add. So, but doing the actual respin, or not the respin, but the, what do they call them? Fedora spins.
Right.
So I got the full XFCE ISO, installed that as I would do any other ISO, and it worked. It worked really well.
So apparently you're not alone, Zeb. Jason in our patron chat says, I'm testing the KDE version of not having the best experience with it either. So there you go.
Mhm.
Looks
Well,
like you should go for the regular ISO, and maybe something's buggy with the net install version at the moment.
Possibly, but yeah, that's what I've been up to this week. Usual Linux stuff with Zeb.
Very cool.
This episode of Destination Linux is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. It's optimized to make managing and scaling apps easy with an intuitive API, multiple storage options, integrated firewalls, load balancers, and so much more. You can get all this plus access to their world-class customer support for as low as $5 a month. Or you can use their flexible pricing structure for as low as 0.7 cents per hour. And as Ryan would say, that's cheap. DigitalOcean also has 2,000 cloud-agnostic tutorials to help you stay up to date with the latest open source software, languages, and frameworks. Get started on DigitalOcean for 1 month free with a $50 credit by going to do.co/DL. Once again, you can get started on DigitalOcean with that $50 credit by going to do.co/DL. And we thank DigitalOcean for sponsoring this episode.
Up first in the community feedback this week, Leaston writes in to say, Dear DL, a big thank you for providing such great entertainment and education about Linux. I really enjoy and look forward to your podcast each week, and I have learned so much over the years. I would like to raise with you a prickly discussion topic based on my many years of use and exposure to listening to over 10 podcasts dedicated to Linux. The topic being Linux snobbery. I have spent some considerable time over the past 18 months listening out for what I would describe as the dark side of the force over recent times, as I've seen this as an opposite of what Linux truly represents to me and the community. The darkness manifests itself in many subtle forms such as jokes, derogatory comments, interestingly over referencing Linux Mint or no mention at all of common distros. In my detailed observations, I sense that using certain distros are perceived to be a bizarre badge of honor and superiority. By the way, is used by Ryan. And there are some podcasts that have an unbiased undertone towards a specific distro only, at the cost of neutrality. I have taken the time to listen and observe. If the Linux distro of choice fits a user's workflow, then I feel this should be celebrated rather than judged, as we all evolve at different places but are heading towards the same light. We just choose the different paths along the way. So he says, Linux rules, long live Linux, and kind regards. He also says, P.S. This is the season of goodwill, so we should all be nice to Michael because Michael rocks. I actually did not add that into the email.
You didn't. That actually was there.
That was there. So.
I almost deleted the email, even though he had a really good point in here because he put that
just
in there.
Just because of that, yep.
Yeah, but I let this one slide this time.
That's cool.
I think he has this is actually coming up quite a bit lately, almost nonstop between Twitter, Telegram, just forums, people talking about this negative attitude. I had a comment on the video I did, which somebody was saying, hey, I'm curious, why is everybody so into Arch and this thing? I tried it. I didn't think it was such a big deal, but people act like it's this badge of honor if you run Arch and that type of thing. And I made the comment and basically said, the whole thing with Arch is you enjoy the AUR, you like the customization, the things you learn while you install it. It's stable. It's a rolling release. That's why people like it. Everything else, a lot of it is kind of jokes. Or if some people actually believe they're superior because they run Arch, they need to get their head checked. But those people exist in every type of environment.
Yeah, sure.
And actually, the example he gave here wasn't Arch; it was Fedora. Interestingly enough, and some of the specific.
Yeah, I gave it just to give a razzing to Ryan.
Yeah,
so
of course, naturally. I mean, see, everybody picks on me, so the next email needs to say, "Please leave Ryan alone and quit." Tell Michael to quit picking on Ryan.
No, there wasn't an entire episode just dedicated to a stool for you.
Well, I didn't buy a $9 stool either, so I didn't deserve it. But it's interesting. I'm hearing a lot of this, people talking about this. And, every time I hear this, I reflect back and think about any time that we have been, negative towards a project or had issues. And there's this fine line that you have to walk. Because just because we say something we don't like that Ubuntu does or Fedora does or Arch does, doesn't mean we hate the people doing it, doesn't mean we dislike the distro, just means we don't like it. When we had a discussion in our Telegram group recently about PowerShell. PowerShell is, interestingly enough, some people got pretty worked up over the PowerShell thing. We were talking about the fact that I noticed when I was asked to install it to see if it would work on a Pinebook Pro, that this message flashed by really quick. And I was like, what's that? Because I was testing. Someone said, hey, I want to know if the PowerShell works on it. And I go up to the message and it talks about telemetry that it's enabling. And it gives you the option, though, at the end to turn off that telemetry, but it flashes by during the install process. It's not at the end where you would pause. It's during the install. It flashes real quick this message that, hey, by the way, we're installing telemetry. And that, to me, when Microsoft is saying, hey, we want to get into open source and we want the community to take us serious, a lot of people use Linux to get away from that telemetry. Does that mean I hate PowerShell and I can't stand anybody who uses it? No, exactly. But I'm going to question somebody putting a product in open source and adding telemetry into it. Because at the point that we all start accepting all this telemetry and saying, okay, well, it's okay for this company to do it, and it's okay for this company to do it because, well, it's open source, then we get to the point where what are we gaining from being on Linux anymore? You might as well just get on Windows and use WSL and be good to go. So
I'm curious to find out, did you do any tests to say that, no, don't turn it on? Was it then leaking information like they do on Microsoft, where you say, no, there's absolutely no way of turning everything off and you have to send at least basic information? Did you test whether or not it was leaking stuff back to Microsoft?
No, I have no idea. And, PowerShell isn't particularly interesting to me. I did it because somebody wanted to make sure it ran on the Pinebook Pro, which it does. But I found it interesting where they put that message. That was my biggest problem with it, because it gives you the option to turn it off. Right in that message, it actually tells you, hey, you could use this command to turn it off, which is nice. But the way it was put in the install, nobody's going to see that, right? Most people are not paying attention to all those screens flashing by after you click the enter button for an install to take place, and you got all this stuff scrolling. You're not going to see it. I thought that's rather suspicious. Now, in its defense, I could probably go onto the GitHub, make a suggestion. Hey, you need to put the message at the end. Maybe it wasn't intentional and those type of things. But my point ultimately is this. There are things that we bring out on this show that we don't like. There are problems that we have. And that doesn't mean we hate the projects. That doesn't mean anybody who uses it is stupid or we don't like them. It just means that we personally, our opinion is we don't like something that they're doing with it. And hopefully it doesn't go personal. And that's where it would be a difference, in my opinion.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. And to add on to what you're saying, or to dovetail on to what you're saying, you wouldn't want us to come on here. And if you want just the facts, the plain, basic, straightforward facts with no opinion whatsoever, go read the feature specs on any given distro. If you go to their site, go to Fedora site, they'll tell you what the feature set is. They'll tell you what the positives are and what the, what we try to do is give you the kind of information that you would get if you were an iPhone user or an Apple user and you went on to the Apple forums or the iPhone forums to find out what other people that were using Apple and iPhone liked and disliked, right? And so as people who just use Linux every day for all of the things, even Michael, as much as we give him crap, because we all take this stuff very seriously, and Ryan works for a major corporate company, and Michael owns his own business, and I own a business, and Zeb is not only lives on it personally, but also do you work on Linux, Zeb?
I don't, unfortunately, no, but I am a software tester, so I have that technical background. But not only for Peppermint, but in my real job as well. I test the software before it goes out into the rest of the business.
But you have experience going through things and saying, here's what a user would expect to find, and here's what it equates to a good user experience and a bad user experience. And so when you bring the four of us together and look at something, I guess all I can tell you is I would plead with you to accept the fact that you want us to come on here and say, hey, go buy the Pine phone because it's going to be a really great buy. You're going to get a lot of value for your money. And we really think that company is going in a good direction. And hey, you know what? Right now, we probably suggest you hold off on the Librem phone because it doesn't make phone calls and they're charging a lot of money for something we don't think adds a lot of value to the community. That's what you want for people who spend all waking day and night waiting for Sunday to come together to tell you, hey, here's what we experienced throughout the week. And so it's not about tearing people down. And like Ryan said perfectly, it's not about attacking the individual. It's about giving honest and straightforward criticism, because the truth is Linux is never going to get better, and we are never going to be able to adopt more users if we can't fix the problems that exist within. So when a company does a good job, like Pine, we extol them, and when a company does a bad job, we call them out, and that goes for distros as well as hardware companies. And because distros are such an interpersonal thing, we all have different views on what distro is the best and what distro is good, and then some of us are mistaken, like Ryan, and use half-baked beta software called Arch. Either way,
yeah. But bringing it back in line,
that's snobbery, Noah.
Yeah, but bringing it back in line to what the email is talking about, if you think we are being snidey, if you think we are being unprofessional and not offering a balanced opinion, because as Noah said, that we have 4 distinct different personalities on the show who can bring different viewpoints. If you think there has been a time where we have been elitist or negative, please let us know, because that's not our intent. We just want to bring you honest opinions about stuff that's happening in Linux.
And we want to be funny while doing it, right? I mean, let's not throw that out. We add a certain level of sarcasm to introduce humor because, frankly, this stuff is dry, right? The people who write this stuff, and when these stories come out, when they're written by very technical people, it reads like a changelog, and that's not entertaining. That's not. You don't want to sit around and watch that. So you have to introduce a certain amount of humor to be able to get through some of this stuff.
Yeah, and one of the big things I was promoting last year, especially, was to go out there and say thank you to developers in the community that work on these projects that you love. But there's this also thing that I'm seeing about any negative, feedback being given to a distro or a project, that everyone seems to think you have to be doing a kumbaya with everyone over a campfire and everything's happy and it's free, so you should have no expectations and all of this stuff going on in the community on the opposite side of that. And to Noah's point, I think that's harmful. If we sit here and just tell you, hey, WSL is the greatest thing in the world, and PowerShell doing telemetry is fine because it just makes the software better, and we sell all of this, that everything that anybody does, as long as it's tagged with the word open source, is fine. To me, that is a disservice to the community, and which is why you see us basically raising these topics and saying, hey, we have a problem with it. And like Noah said, I think we would be amiss to not be doing that. I think we would be doing a disservice to the community. So Rick writes in to say, hey guys, longtime listener, but new commenter. I'm a supporter of literacy and language development for communities around the world using Wasta Linux, currently in Ethiopia. Basically, that means welcome. Really love your work. Let the banter continue. On that note, to start off, attached is what a $7 stool is like from Ethiopia. A solid piece of wood, hand carved, Michael. A $7 stool.
Did you also notice that it's probably about like 3 inches tall?
But it's beautiful.
It is. It is really nice.
It's only $7, and you have that aluminum can looking mitten of a stool back there.
Mine is space age. It's space age though.
Oh,
so.
Okay.
And for those of you who like to listen to the podcast, you'll have to jump on the website, and we'll have a picture of it on there for you.
There you go. So regarding your discussion of Linux Mint 19.3, you did a good job describing why Ubuntu Cinnamon is relevant. Cinnamon has met the needs of our users coming from pirated Windows XP 7 and 10 for several years better than other desktop environments. But Mint does hacky stuff that you guys mentioned, like the Firefox profile settings, the PPA pinning, etc., that break the standard Ubuntu experience. But it is their right and decision to do so. So thanks again for answering your early episode questions about why is Ubuntu Cinnamon needed. Hey, I see how he turned that full circle right there, because I was like, why is it? I'm on to you, Rick. Note that Plasma would be interesting alternative and have been testing it for multiple years, but as noted by Michael and Ryan, it's a pain to set up, automate our customization so we can roll them out to users without needing to manually configure every install.
Oh, yeah.
GNOME gschema.override files allow this on GNOME-based systems, so we can distribute system defaults that we prefer without hacking and breaking upstream things. Thus, Cinnamon layout is merely a tool to swap around gschema.override files to set alternative defaults. So any leads on customizing defaults for Plasma at a system level would be welcome. Keep up the great work. When you have a chance, give Cinnamon a bit more attention when viewed apart from Linux Mint. A lot of the negatives about it go away since they are not mainly Cinnamon complaints, but rather complaints about other things Mint does. Rick.
Yeah, I think we were clear about the difference between the Mint and Cinnamon thing, though. But as far as like the Plasma stuff, it is possible to do like deployment of automation for customizations and settings and stuff like that for Plasma. It's just not cleanly done. It's not, there's not like a package you could export or whatever and then like import that package. You have to get the files from your .config folder, and there's a lot of files depending on what you want to deploy out or whatever. So while it is possible, it is also fair to point to that it's saying it is a kind of a pain to do so.
You would pretty much have to write a script for it, because when we were doing the Plasma video, Michael, where you were kind of showing your setup, I asked you, hey, how do you move your settings over to another desktop? And you went through it, and about in the middle of it, I said, well, I'm cutting all this out of the video because I'm already bored and it takes too much effort. So
yeah, it is quite a lot. There's many pieces to, like, what's weird is that there's so much functionality in Plasma, and there's so many things you can tweak and everything, but they've never put the structure in to make it possible to provide those settings to people or to redeploy those or anyway, because they're like, and it's weird because of all of how it's all set up, is everything is stored in a file, so it is totally possible. It's just a convoluted thing to do. So
yeah, there you go.
But Cinnamon is quite a nice DE, and I agree that it's, if you've tried in other distributions, you'll see the way that they implement it is different than Mint. Although I do think that Mint is definitely the place to test out Cinnamon, since they make Cinnamon and everything. So it's like what Cinnamon is supposed to be. So it's if you haven't used Cinnamon in a while, Mint is probably the best one to try it out in the first place. But the issues with Mint is like, this actually goes along with the previous topic where we were talking about the negativity of some of the community being like having a stigma attached to things. And I think that Cinnamon and Mint are that kind of thing. But it's also to point out that Mint, our negativity towards Mint is specific to certain pieces, but other pieces you can also recognize there's good things about it too. So it's kind of like the same thing of a project having just because there's a negative aspects in certain cases doesn't mean that we don't like the project entirely. And I think that Mint is a good example of that.
Mm-hmm. And these two emails highlight why we love hearing from our worldwide community. We have many ways for your voice to be heard. You can send us a short email or video that may get incorporated into the show. Send your video links or emails to comments@destinationlinux.org.
We're so proud to have FreeGeek as our community-chosen sponsor for Destination Linux Network. If you're not aware, the Destination Linux Network, we're doing a charity program for a FreeGeek that was voted on our DLN forum, and this is a really great organization because they help to bridge the digital divide, provide education to the communities, leverage the power of open source and Linux, and fight for rights to repair. And if you're not aware, that is a campaign to sort of like basically guarantee that when you buy something, you actually do own it rather than the common thing now of having like a license applied to it or whatever. So FreeGeek shares these values, the values of our community, and we're asking everyone to come together and to help us reach the $3,000 goal we have for the fundraising. And thanks to Zeb with his recent 24-hour stream, we're already at over halfway there with we have now got to $1,500. And in addition to the monetary donation, if you would like, you can donate hardware that will be properly recycled goods, and they can give it to like people who are in need of hardware. And they have like these really cool programs that allowing you to people to come in and volunteer so that they can earn to get their hardware, their donated hardware and that kind of thing. And they also allow for e-waste support. So if you have something that you want to do, you don't have to throw it in the garbage because that just creates a big problem overall. That you can send it to them and they will properly recycle it for you. And if they can't be repaired or something like that, they will take care of it that way. So that's really, really, really awesome. And if you would like to contribute, be sure to go to destinationlinux.network/freegeek to get involved today.
Now, I may or may not have been spreading a rumor out there that Noah's been basically spending all of his extra money on bubbly water and had not met his commitment to beat my donation to FreeGeek. Oh, look at him just shoving it all in our faces. For those that can't see, he's drinking that fancy $5 can bubbly water there. Oh, 2 of them. Oh, my gosh. But Noah has actually, this episode, not only matched my donation to FreeGeek, but exceeded it. So he's really showing his passion and support for giving up basically a whole case of bubbly to FreeGeek. So thank you, Noah.
Happy to support FreeGeek by sipping on the bubbly. There probably is actually a way to tie bubbly responsibly into giving away technology. Like maybe on my show, I should do a thing for every $10 somebody donates to FreeGeek, I'll drink a bubbly in a minute on the air or something. There's got to be a way to tie that in.
You'll send him a signed can of bubbly.
I'll send them a signed can of bubbly and a picture of me on a stool.
For every $50 donated.
You could actually do a 24-hour live stream
drinking bubbly.
Continually drink bubbly.
Be great.
That's awesome.
Great KH was busy finishing out 2019 with some new kernel releases. We now have 3 stable releases out: 5.4.7, 4.19.92, and 4.14.161 are out. Now, the most notable fixes include AMD Ryzen Threadripper 3900 has an MCE fix for booting new processors, Intel Comet Lake PCHV, and iCart Lake SoC support added to the Intel driver, and lots of fixes and tweaks. So it's been an exciting year for the Linux kernel, and so much hardware enablement is being added with every single release. We're all hoping that 2020 is going to be even more productive in this regard with releasing Intel and their new dedicated GPU, and a whole series of Intel and AMD CPU releases are to be expected. So already we have kernel 5.5, which is, among other things, a fix for AppArmor regressions, which will be a welcome sight for Debian and Ubuntu users who are suffering from performance issues. Now, we've got a couple questions for the crew. So with so much progress being made on Linux this year, from Proton to hardware to enablement, Linux has made some great leaps. What are some of the things that you'd like to see improved in 2020? I guess we'll start with Ryan.
Well, for me, I think, and you've agreed with this in the past, better professional audio equipment support from the get-go would be fantastic to see in Linux, namely with Pulse Audio. I think Pulse Audio desperately needs an overhaul, and, well, if not an overhaul, then a lot of improvements in its compatibility with basically industry standardized audio equipment out there. And I think that would be a huge improvement I would love to see in Linux in 2020. Tablet and mobile support, me and you have gone back and forth a little bit on this, but for the most part, I agree that a lot of the market is headed towards mobile and tablet. I don't believe it will replace laptops and desktops fully. I don't think we're even close there, but that doesn't matter because we all know people are using them at a ridiculous level, in many cases using it more than they touch their desktop or laptop if they even have one. So I think Linux not having good tablet and mobile support out of the box is an issue that needs to be addressed. And the last thing I would love to see is a corporate or well-financed entity focused on the desktop for Linux. Easy install, hardware partnerships, mobile integration, rolling release for the hardware piece. So you're getting the latest updates. Somebody that actually cares about the desktop and not just the server stuff would be welcome, because I think Linux is ready to dominate on the desktop if we actually had somebody who was pushing it heavily forward versus kind of doing it as a, we have the desktop, but we're more focused on the server stuff, which is how I feel.
I couldn't agree with that more.
Yeah.
Jeez, I couldn't agree with that anymore if I tried.
I feel like every company that we have in Linux doesn't really care about the desktop at all.
Canonical might be the exception to that. With Martin Wimpress in charge of the desktop, I have no idea. I've not talked to him, so I have no idea what kind of support he's getting, logistical support and financial support and stuff like that. But as far as picking the right guy for the job, Canonical definitely picked the right guy for the job.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
As far as Canonical, the company, the fact that they trimmed down their company and put somebody who they know. I mean, I know for a fact that it's not a secret what Martin thinks about Linux on the desktop and where his passion lies and stuff like that. So the fact that Canonical chose to move him to that position speaks well about where their direction of the Linux desktop is going and what value they place on it. Now, again, we'll see how much money gets put into it. We'll see how much development goes forward. But I think they're probably the in my opinion, the leading company focusing on the Linux desktop and probably the most likely to. I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. We need somebody to do that.
Yeah, I don't think it's being done anymore. I think there were focus on a desktop to get people interested in some of these companies. And then once that interest came, they said, oh, there's money over here and it's in the server world. Nobody has figured out quite yet how to monetize the desktop, although I don't think it's really that hard to figure out a plan for it. Nobody's done it. And so therefore they don't see that there are big giant dollar signs there for the desktop, specifically in the support arena, which I think people would pay for and welcome to actually not be, just going to a random forum and hoping somebody's going to see their comment, but having a direct support line for their desktop. I think people would pay for that.
Even if you had to pay for it, right?
Yep, absolutely. So I think there are ways to make money on the desktop. I agree that Martin is probably the best hope for Canonical to get back and refocused on the desktop, because I don't think it's been there personally from Canonical the last year.
I agree.
I do think that they could get there. I also, look at some of the companies like Zorin out there who are selling their desktop environment and trying to find ways to make money. There's some hope there. But System 76, this is some of the ones we're not thinking about. Maybe it's going to be a hardware company out there that comes out and is able to pair the two together.
I don't think so. And I say that with all due respect to hardware companies who I have a lot of deep respect for, but the reality is it's the spork syndrome. Is it a good fork? Not really. Is it a good spoon? Not really. But hey, it's a fork and a spoon all in one. Yay, right? Unless you're a company worth billions of dollars, you're not going to make that work well. Concentrate on the software, make a good operating system, or concentrate on the hardware, make good hardware. Don't try and do both.
Interesting.
I just don't think we're there yet.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, but I also think that, I second that Ryan's point about the desktop as being a main focus. And I think that it's interesting because I think Canonical used to be that company, and they kind of switched a little bit to not that company. But I think that Noah's point about, putting Martin Wimpress into that position has maybe has a possibility of changing that back to focusing on at least a big degree of the desktop, because with Canonical having originally started for the desktop, they did a ton of work that made the desktop to the point where it is. Because there was for prior to Ubuntu, there was 10 to 15 years of just no desktop focus at all. And then Ubuntu comes around, and then
Nobody
they kind
even
of
cared.
Yeah, they didn't care. And then even if you don't even look at the fact that some distributions use Ubuntu as the base, you could look at the inspiration that has been created from focusing heavily on the desktop, where it used to be the desktop was not really viable for many people other than people who were willing to deal with a lot of headaches. And now we have a position where Ubuntu can be used by practically anyone, as long as their application that they need is available. So like there's so much progress that has been made, and I hope that continues, because there's so much potential, even just making money in the support side, but also having the potential for providing a full ecosystem of an operating system that can do everything, because essentially the only thing that is not there is the desktop still. So
let's get into the specifics here, because I can hear the comments already. Somebody saying, "Oh, you say they're not doing as much for the desktop. What do you mean?" And for me, I'll give you my example. Is this year I've been unable to use Ubuntu. And that has never been the case in the last 4 years. Ubuntu was always the solution, that if I couldn't get something running, I installed Ubuntu, boom, all my hardware worked, everything was fine. It was always my safe place until this year. Now this year, it's actually the anti-safe place. If I go to Ubuntu, my system crashes because it has no support for the latest AMD GPUs, it has no support for the AMD CPUs. It just doesn't work for my stuff, so I can't use it.
You're essentially regressed. You've essentially regressed to using beta software to be able to get Linux to work on the desktop for you. That's the severity of this situation.
No, you mean I use the fantastic and incredible Arch
It's
project.
Good beta software. I agree.
Yeah. No, but Fedora, for instance, has those patches worked in. So if you have people who are talking about the 5700 XT, you're gonna have to do some hackery to get that to work in Ubuntu right now. You do get the latest Fedora, boom, it's going to work right out of the box. So who's taking the desktop, in a more serious basis? Now, that's me, and everybody knows my AMD thing, but I think people want to hear what your thoughts are, Noah and Michael. And when you say that, what do you mean?
When I say when I'm talking about Linux on the desktop to being taken
not
seriously?
being focused on. Yep.
I think that to a certain degree we focus on the wrong sides, right? Like anybody, and if we haven't proven this in Linux, I don't know what has. Getting the basics of a desktop environment down, where we can launch applications, close applications, manage processes, restart, log in, log out, stuff like that, right? A lot of people have gotten that right in their own different way. If you go into the Linux forums, you'll find people debating nonstop day and night if KDE is better than GNOME or GNOME better than XFCE, whatever. There is no consensus on that. And frankly, the reason for that is because they're all pretty good. Where Linux falls down, or where Linux on the desktop falls down, in my estimation, is we are not working with software manufacturers. We're not going to the Adobes of the world and the Slacks of the world and the Telegrams of the world and whoever it is that has software out there. We're not going to them and saying, how do we make this work better? I'll give you a perfect example. The latest version of Telegram that I have on my Ubuntu installation, every time I go to download a picture, it gives me this message saying that I'm not using the most up-to-date version of the Telegram, right? What is the most up-to-date version of Telegram?
That's weird. I don't get that on Arch. Huh.
So, and to your point, it depends on what distribution you on. It depends on how you install it, right? If I'm trying to installing the Snap package, I might have a different experience. But if I install the Snap package, then all of my downloads go to an entirely separate location. There's all these little weird paper cuts that exist inside of Linux, and they're not enough that any dedicated user they're not going to get in the way, because we just troubleshoot our way around it because we're used to it. And I stand by what I've said for years, which is you just have to decide what problems you want to solve. But at the same time, I have to imagine that fixing that little message that pops up on Telegram is not a big deal if somebody were to take the time to look into it and do it. I would imagine that there are a lot of those kinds of things that you and I just take for granted, that we click on a Samba share thing and you just click back out and then click back in to get the little window to populate. All these little workarounds that we just do subconsciously. That's what's keeping Linux out of mainstream. What's keeping manufacturers like Dell from saying, other manufacturers like Dell from saying, hey, we'll just ship this stuff on our computers if people want it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I mean, there's the paper cuts are probably the biggest issues, because we kind of ignore them, even though there's a lot of them, but they're just there are tiny little things here and there that, like, if you look at the fact that when a lot of people talk about using Linux as their main distro or main desktop operating system, they'll sometimes be kind of talking about the terminal and then defend the terminal being faster and easier to use. And once you know,
which it is.
yeah, which once you know that, and once you have already experienced it and you are aware of it, yes, it's faster and easier in certain cases. But when you are just getting used to it, it's a very big problem.
And to your point, just yesterday I was helping my wife with something, and the NFS share in our house got screwed up on her laptop. And she said, "Can you help me with this?" And she said, "Will you teach me how to do this? Because I'd like to know." I said, "Sure." So I said, "Well, we're going to go into FSTAB, and this is what, And she goes, "Wait, what?" I said, "We're going to go into FSTAB, and this is what, boots your computer up. It mounts all the file systems." And she looks at me and goes, "Can you please just show me how to do this through Dolphin?" I'm like, yeah, that's not a thing. Like, there little stuff like that. We should be able to mount NFS. I mean, if NFS is the network file sharing thing that we're going to use on Linux, why isn't there a way to? And if there is a way to do it through the UI, and I'm just missing it, there probably is. But chances are, it's probably some third-party add-on or some piece of GUI software that I have to use. It's not just I click connect to server. What kind of server is it? NFS, and then enter in the NFS share like I would do on any other operating system. Little stuff like that kills us, and I really would like to see us get better about that. Michael, I want to move on. I want to go kind of circle back to our questions. Great discussion, but I want to circle back. Michael, what are some of the things you're looking forward to in 2020 for the Linux kernel?
Well, in addition to that, I also have the I really want to see more companies use the universal app formats. I think that they are incredible value. That is one of the things that Linux has a problem with is the chicken or the egg problem, and that is just getting users to use it. And the reason why we don't have people using it is for certain applications aren't available. And prior to the universal formats, there was not a reasonable option for a company to support Linux. Like every time I had a thing, when the first app formats came out with snaps and app images and Flatpaks were announced, I was a huge fan of these. And there was this question on like Ask Ubuntu where if someone was asking like, why is this being done? And it was just, and my response was basically, they have so much value because they make the traditional package format not necessary for companies. And this is a huge importance to me because when you have, like, I've been involved in creating software for Linux and an app level for a long time. And one of the worst things about doing that was having to have different package sources for each distribution and also each version of each distribution. Because if I made if I made a package for Debian, that doesn't mean it worked on Ubuntu. And if I make a package for Ubuntu 1804, it doesn't mean it works for 1904. Like, there's so many different pieces that just create such a headache that if you take that, apply that to like 20 different distros that a company would expect to be expected to support, it makes it where there's so much reason to just ignore Linux because of the amount of effort and the amount of value in it, because of how, like, the chicken or the egg problem. Once the companies are supporting it, there's more value in how many people they're getting value or getting usage of. But the main thing is those app formats make that issue completely moot, and that's why I hope that there's a lot more push for those formats. Whichever format you want, to me, it doesn't matter because they all work together and there's no conflict. So whatever company wants to choose whichever one they want.
Is that going to be the problem, to your point, though, Michael, is that we're going to fragment the universal package manager to the point where we're right back to where we started? I mean, there's the app image, the Flatpak, the snap.
Not really.
I'll use whichever one happens to have the software I want at the moment, but
they don't conflict with each other. So it's whatever they pick.
And that's to Michael's point. It doesn't matter which company chooses an app image or a snap or a Flatpak. They all work universally. Now, if you prefer snaps over Flatpak and Adobe decide to deliver their software into Flatpak, then you've got a big decision to make. Do I want to use Adobe because they've put it in Flatpak, or do I continue to use open source stuff? But the fact that they've got it there and they can just concentrate on one of the three, and let's hope that more don't come along, because I think 3 is going to be a big enough choice for them. It will hopefully mean that they start bringing their software over.
Yeah, it used to be like, now having the 3 different formats is somewhat issue in the argument of like there's a little bit of fragmentation, but the 3 formats that do not conflict with each other is a much better fragmentation situation than we used to have, where we had 40 different package formats and they all had different versionings of them. Because even if you ignored the other ones that exist, like EOPKG, and you don't only talk about that, you just talk about the big two, RPM and Deb, those still had massive conflicts with a different version of the distro you're using or the different base of the distro that you're using. There was so much of like even the 3 is 1,000 times better than it used to be. So I think that the fragmentation of the 3 universal app formats is not really that big of an issue, because of there's only 3 now, and they allow for support for so many different distributions, and it also makes it where there's no conflict whether if they use snaps or Flatpaks. That's the biggest value, that there is no conflict, and it doesn't matter to me which one they use. There are some issues still with all 3 of them in a variety of different ways. So whatever the company decides to pick is fine. But I think that's the biggest push for what could be making the desktop actually becoming more viable.
See, in most industries, at some point, like for instance, I don't remember what the competing was, but it came out with Microsoft. It was like Hi-Fi. Was it Hi-Fi was the format, digital video format versus Blu-ray?
No,
And
that was HD DVD.
Yeah, HD DVD. That's it. So there was that versus Blu-ray, and there were all these arguments about which one was better, and there were good points on both sides. But eventually, the industry stopped and said, "Okay, we've gone with Blu-ray. Let's stop producing HD DVD and having, both of them sitting on the shelf and confusing people with 2 different things." Linux doesn't ever do that, right? It's just
that's
going
because
to keep
there's no
competing
cost
with
in doing that.
Flatpak versus Snap versus AppImage versus whatever.
No, I agree with you 100%. Michael made a passing comment I just wanted to address real quickly. To correct that, I guess what Ryan's saying is that there is no choice made for consumers, and most people don't want to make a choice. The reason Ring Doorbell is, even though it can't tie into anything, even though you can't pull an RTSP feed, even though it sends the video directly back to the Ring's camera company, and they keep recordings of it, and you have to pay money to get to access to the recordings, your recordings that they keep. Even though that's the case, people keep buying Ring Doorbell because when you walk into Best Buy, everybody else has a Ring Doorbell, and that is the prolific choice. And so if we could get to that on Linux, even if it removed a little bit of freedom, but if there was just an agreed upon, hey, if you want to go and fragment and go out on the fringes, you're welcome to do that, and Linux is supporting of that. But if you don't want to do that, here is the thing that we recommend you do. If we were all unified on that answer, we'd be set. The problem is people like Ryan are going to tell people, hey, if you really want a good experience, if you're buying a brand new computer, you better have Arch. And people like me are going to say, listen, I agree with that from a hardware perspective, but I suggest you buy a 1 or 2 year old computer and just put Ubuntu on it because it's a little more polished. And that is an inconsistent message, and that provides problems.
Right.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And but both points are completely
if only
valid.
we had a foundation that could set a standard
Right?
and say, hey, you could go do what you want, but this is our standard. If only we had that.
Yeah, that'd be nice. And my last thing I wanted to point out about like what my hopes are for it is kind of in conjunction with all these things. It all connects to it in a way, but I want more people focusing on Wine. Like maybe companies do some kind of funding or backing to help Wine. That way we can help facilitate more of the chicken or the egg problem being solved, because like with Wine, it allows us to have support for some software that the companies are not being able to use. And I also want to have like a kind of like a combination of those things where if like the Wine, doing a Wine wrapped application is just completely reasonable for a company to do if they want to support Linux in that kind of gradual way. They could actually have Wine wrapped inside of their application and wrap it inside of one of the universal formats, and that would make it possible to use and have Linux users be able to use their software in a easier approach to getting there. Because like TeamViewer for a very long time had a Wine wrapper for their entire system, and it worked pretty, totally fine for most cases. So that was great. And then they eventually transition away from Wine, so they have their own native client now, and that is something that another application could do.
Help me with this, Michael. Is it actually a native client, or have they just integrated Wine that well that you don't notice it?
They switched to Qt based to they were to be able to do native stuff. I don't know if they have no Wine whatsoever, but the way they were wrapping it prior, they don't use that stuff anymore. And I don't know if it's because it's proprietary. I don't know if 100% out of Wine, but they did get rid of the toolkit that required them to use Wine, and that they did announce that that's why they were not doing the Wine wrapper. So I don't know if they're not using any at any level, but the client is no longer Wine wrapped.
Interesting. So Zeb, we've taken up all of your time, but you have 4 seconds to tell us. No, I'm teasing. What are some of the things you would love to see on the Linux desktop?
Well, I'm going to just bring it down to a very simplistic user level. I want to see less regression happening in Linux, because it always seems that in the process of fixing something and bringing out the next new shiny, something breaks somewhere else. Now, this is not down totally to the developers. They can only produce what they produce on the equipment they've got. So where we, the community, can help is that we Linux users need to offer more of our time in testing the software before it comes out. Now, people will say, oh, I'm not clever enough to test software. Yes, you are. You've installed Linux. So you can go and install their version of Linux. You can simply test the new bits of the software that they have produced in their release notes. And does it work for your hardware? You, Ryan, can immediately write back and say, do you know what? This 5700 doesn't work on Ubuntu. Sorry.
But that's the problem, is they have to listen and they have to care, because I've written those letters, and I agree with you 100%, Zeb, but I've written those letters. I've told them, and the comment you get back is, well, we officially support NVIDIA, which, okay, well, that was a great idea back when they owned the whole market, but now they don't. They're losing the market in mass very quickly. Yep. And they don't own the market. And then the next response was, well, then use UKUU. That's a hack. That is not a fix.
No, it's a utility that makes it easy for you not having to understand how to download the latest debs and get it all to work again.
Right.
But my point is, and I'm not being horrible here, but maybe that's a lone voice, somebody who has your passion. Did they get 1,000 people telling them that their 5700s don't work? No, they probably got half a dozen. So what we as a community need to do is go out there and help them test it. Write in and say, look, I'm sorry, it's great, but Nuvo, you still haven't worked out how to use a 2080 Ti yet.
Right.
Give me your latest version, I'll test it for you. I try to do that individually with the individual developers I know, and I've helped Dolphin Oracle over at MX work through some issues with the 2080 Ti. I did the same with Endeavour and Arco Linux. So I'm only one person. There are hundreds of thousands of Linux users out there. If you could just devote a couple of hours a week to testing your favorite piece of software and not just waiting for it to come down and then jump on a forum somewhere and go, oh, this Ubuntu 2020 is rubbish. It's just not working for me. Well, it's a bit like saying, oh, why did they vote the president in if you didn't go out and vote? You can't complain about something if you're not trying to help. So we can make less regression if we volunteer our time to do some simple testing. But Ryan, you're right. They have then got to be willing to listen.
Absolutely. So Noah, what are your asks for 2020 on Linux? What would you like to see?
You know, as far as the kernel goes, I am mostly happy with the way the kernel functions. Like that, I understand it's a complicated piece of development, and there's a lot of people that look for the newest and greatest thing. But for me, it's always about stability and kind of refining stuff out. So there are no big major things I'd like to see. That said, there are some cool things that are in the works, that are related to the kernel that I hope get fleshed out in 2020. And the first one is WireGuard. WireGuard is a fast, modern, secure VPN tunnel that's built right into the kernel. And by all appearances, within the next year, we're going to have it as a stable part and as a thing that people can just depend on, and it'll become, I hope, a lot like KVM in that virtualization just becomes something that we just assume exists with Linux rather than actually having to install or enable or whatever anything. It's just WireGuard is a thing. We can generate SSH keys, we can generate WireGuard keys, and we can have a secure, stable VPN tunnel. I think that would be really interesting. The other thing is, as it relates to your professional multimedia processing, I hope Pipewire, a project that aims to improve the handling of audio and video under Linux, gets a lot more traction and gets a lot more adoption. And between Pipewire and WireGuard, we have the ability to create more FFmpeg style software, things that only exist on Linux and work super well, and that major organizations are gonna look up and say, you know what, if we need to render a bunch of video files, we're just doing it on Linux because they have built-in VPN support. It has Pipewire, which makes the workflow for audio video stuff just crazy cool. One of the things that keeps macOS ahead of the game is because they have spent so much time tweaking and fine-tuning all of the little things to smooth out all the rough edges so you can just sit down and get to work. And between Jason Donenfield and the folks over at Pipewire, we are getting there on Linux. So I really hope that those two projects continue to make headway and that we make some ground there, because I think it will put us in a really good position going forward with Linux.
Nice. All good ones.
So looking back at a mention that Ryan gave earlier about his working with the ARM processors and the Pinebook Pro, what we've got here is the best OS for a Raspberry Pi. Now, Tech Trends had an interesting article discussing the best OS to run for the Raspberry Pi. Now, we've heavily promoted the Raspberry Pi here, and Noah earlier on told us about a great little use for looking at individual streams of your cameras around your house. So what we thought would be a good idea is to say whether or not we agree or disagree, or have we got something else that, according to Trek 10s, provides the best distro to run. So they are mentioning Raspbian, the official operating system of the Raspberry Pi. Arch. Well, Ryan wrote this document. Good opportunity to practice installing Arch. Manjaro runs incredibly on ARM devices like the Pinebook Pro. And Kali Linux, pen testing excellence on a Pi. So for me, it's easy to say, what do I run on my Pi? I don't, because I never used it. I buy these things and I think, what have I given it for? So I've given it to sudo reboot, and he's put it to immense use on, because he's got about 19 Pis in his house now. So let's go over to you guys. And Michael, we'll ask you first, because I don't think I've ever heard you mention that you run anything on a Pi. So do you use a Pi? And if so, what do you use on it?
I want to jump in here because it controls your stool going up and down.
Wow.
You've created a modification.
I mean, that's not remotely true, but I actually kind of want to know if it's possible.
You mean you haven't got it remote control yet? You have to go over there and push it. Oh, okay, well, we can work on that for you.
Yeah, thanks. Perfect. Yeah. Anyway, so I've done a lot of played around with a lot of Pi different stuff, but what I use as my main force for the Pi, I guess, is LibreElec, which is a distribution for Kodi. And it's basically there's a lot of times where you'd want to put Kodi on a thing, but it's not really meant for its own separate thing. So LibreElec takes that and applies a distribution around it, so you get all the benefits of the networking aspects and stuff like that that's not built into Kodi. And that's pretty much the main thing I use my Pi for. But as far as overall distributions, I would say that these are good choices. I think Raspbian is probably the most common choice because it comes from Raspberry Pi. I think that they do extra stuff that's not necessary. Like they made their own DE that you don't really need that. But I think that overall these are fine choices. I do want to point out that they didn't mention Ubuntu Mate as one of the main four. So they should. I mean, Ubuntu Mate is a really good solid option.
They
for
did
the
give
Raspberry
it
Pi.
an honorable mention at the end, but basically stated in this article that because it was so new, in consideration to these other ones, that they hadn't fully tested it, so it got an honorable mention along with Risk OS, which I think that's a Rust based.
No, I think Risk OS is the no, that's React OS. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's out there too.
Yeah.
Noah, what do you use for your Pi?
I usually use the Noobs installer, and then if it's a desktop distribution, it's usually Ubuntu Mate. Like if it's something I'm going to actually click around. If it's an appliance-based thing, it's just whatever the Noobs, whatever the project recommends. So most of the time, that's Raspbian with something added on. So Volumio has their own image that you flash onto it. A Home Assistant has its own image that you flash onto it. So 90% of my Pis are flashed with some special thing. But if I was going to pick a distribution, I was going to run it like a computer, Ubuntu Mate, hands down, not even a question for me.
Yeah, I really like Ubuntu Mate on the Pi, and I helped do some beta testing for it. Had a fantastic time when he was first working on it. But I generally stick with, if it's not a desktop experience I'm doing on the Pi, then I stick with Raspbian, just because it is pretty much any how-to document or anything is going to be linked back to Raspbian. In fact, my Pi-hole and everything else is based on Raspbian. I will tell you, though, that Manjaro runs so well on these devices. So if you've not checked out Manjaro as an option, if you're an Arch fan, I think it's just absolutely incredible on the Pinebook Pro. And I imagine, I haven't put it on regular Raspberry Pis, that it's good there too. And I also want to mention, we talk about Raspberry Pi a lot, but there's a lot of other single board computers out there that you can play with. I think Raspberry Pi, you're going to have the most support, right? You're going to see the most documentation and help and forums because that's what everybody has. But for instance, we talk a lot about Pine 64. Well, they have the Rock Pro 64 option, which is a 2 gigabyte and 4 gigabyte variation with a very high-end CPU and GPU in it as well that you could play with and install these OSs on. In addition, for instance, Manjaro, when I went to their download site, had a direct install for the Rock Pro. So you have other options on these boards as well to do projects with.
Yeah, there's quite a few options. I mean, there's like the Raspberry Pi is probably the biggest known, brand for these kinds of boards, but there's a ton of stuff. Like the Pine 64 has multiple different boards you could check out. There's the Banana Pi, there's the Beagle board, there's a bunch of other stuff like the Odroid, and many, many other things. So there's the only issue with these kinds of boards is that one operating system that's built for one doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for another. So if they make it for the Raspberry Pi, there's no guarantee it's going to work for any of the other boards. So you want to make sure that when you go to get one of those boards, you have something in mind for that particular board, and what you want to use will work with it. So that's the kind of the thing. So you don't want to just go out and get a random board if you haven't done any research on it because of that whole ARM-based.
I mean, that's a good point. Because
issue.
Sometimes I just find a good deal on a Raspberry Pi and will buy it just because I know at some point I'll find a project for it, and it always works out. There's always some point there's a project. Whereas if you buy one of these other boards and you find that project you want, and it just happens to not be compatible with it, that would be a shame.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, make sure you know what you're getting.
Yeah,
and actually that's given a good thing for me because next time I find the urge to buy the Raspberry Pi 5, I'll just buy it and ship it to you, Ryan.
Thank you. I actually would appreciate that. I'll take them all the time. So let us know in the community what you do with your Pi. We see some of the folks in our patron chat saying they use Armbian for a headless Pi-hole. And I'm sure there are many other awesome projects that you're involved in. There's everything from robotics to AI to clustering them together. There are so many projects. It's endless with it. But I would love on our discourse forum for you guys to post pictures and show us what you use your Raspberry Pi or alternative, maybe what you use your Rock Pro for, and let us see.
And I'll make a thread for this particular topic so you have it directly in the show notes to check out and let us know what you use on your Raspberry Pi or whatever other board you use as well.
Excellent.
So we're going to move on to another section, but this is actually kind of somewhat similar because we talked about the Odroid, and there is a new device that looks really cool that's coming out later this month, and it's called the Odroid Go. It's a $50 handheld device, which is essentially basically like a retro games device, but also it can be used as a full computer. Well, not a full computer, but it can use it as a computer because of the power it has in it. So this is for anyone who has like nostalgia for the Nintendo DS, Game Boy, PSP, the Sega Game Gear, any of that kind of stuff. You can use the Odroid Go Advance system that's coming out that allows you to essentially play these games through an emulation software. So later in January, there's going to have this device is going to come out. That's what the estimate is right now, and it's a 3.5-inch display with like an LCD display. It's going to have 1.3 gigahertz rock chip with a quad-core ARM processor. It's going to have a Mali GPU with the G31 MP2 graphics. It's going to have 1 gig of RAM. It's going to have its built-in speakers, headphone jack as well, and it's going to have 3,000 milliamp hour battery. So it's really cool because it's essentially it allows you to do like the old style handheld game, but in a more do-it-yourself sort of approach. So you can actually customize it and put on your own different emulation station interface, or you can have I think you could put like one of the retro style. Like
RetroPie or whatever.
Yeah, RetroPie or like Laka or something like that. So it's a really cool idea, and I think it looks pretty slick. I don't know why, but I really like the transparent case of it as well.
I've always loved the transparent cases to look inside and see the components that make it up.
Yeah,
this
it's really
looks
cool.
like they ship you a kit, and that's why it's so inexpensive. They basically ship you all of the parts, and you assemble these parts into your portable game system.
Right.
but it looks pretty cool. The price, though, we talked about this in my Geek Telegram chat about the price being one of those things where it's so low. Everyone's like, could it really be as good as it looks type of thing? I hope it is. It looks very, very neat. I would love to get this in the hands of my kids, for instance, for traveling or going on trips where they could play some of these games. And back when Zeb did have a Raspberry Pi, we had a little competition going of who could get the most emulated games. Zeb won. I think he had some ridiculous, insane amount of games. How many did you acquire?
I think it ended up being, I don't know why, but the figure of 2,500 springs to mind. But then I think another guy on the internet, Henk, came up with 128 gigabyte image that had something stupid like 50,000 games. Or it was just, you could never play them in a lifetime if you tried to play them one a day for the rest of your life. I mean, 55,000 games is ridiculous.
And it's really cool on this particular device because they have like retro games because, Zeb loves pixelated games. So you have a lot of those available to you as well. But I like this as I want to try this out because this is the second version of it because they had the Odroid Go and this is the advanced version of it. So it's actually like a little bit more powerful than the previous version. Yeah, because they've already done another version, it has a lot more, like I'm more excited about it because they've kind of like sort of a proven track record.
Right.
I can't wait. Imagine it, 3.5-inch screen, 4 little blocks. There's me wheels. A bigger block is me truck, and I hit the square in front of me. That's me caravan. Oh, it's going to be fantastic.
Perfect.
So next up in the news, we have a story of, a company everybody hates that continues to do things to make people hate them. EA, a gaming Goliath that is regularly listed as the most hated company, voted for by the community, not just Linux community, the entire gaming community, pretty much every year. In fact, even during the banking debacle, I believe they were still rated the most hated company out there, which is shocking how much people hate this company.
They were basically, at most, they're tied with Comcast. That's how hated they are.
So EA has decided to do some things to make people dislike them more, including banning Linux users from playing their games. So they recently started banning users who were basically playing their game Battlefield 5. And if you were playing it through Wine, which is the only way you could play it, then their anti-cheat tool, which considers DXVK VK to be cheating, apparently, would mistakenly ban them. Now, this has happened before with other games. So other games have, whether they're running it through Wine or something else in Linux, would trigger their anti-cheat system to flag the Linux user and it would ban. Then people would, the internet would show a little bit of rage, maybe post some tweets about it, and the company would quickly reverse that decision, get it fixed, and Linux users were back in the game. Not EA. No. EA basically decided to double down, and any response they've given so far to users banned is pretty much, we've looked at your case and you used Wine and you're banned. So,
So before you get onto the next bit, we talked about just before the show that there are now some naysayers coming along to say, really, EA banning players? But I think it's this next quote that you're going to provide us from. With a company. I think this company has got enough reputation to be listened to and be believed.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lutris joined in and tweeted out that it has come to our attention that several Battlefield 5 players recently been banned. It's more than several. There's a whole Reddit forum full of people for playing on Linux, and that EA has chosen not to revert those wrongful punishments. Due to this, we advise to refrain from playing any multiplayer games published by EA in the future. So Lutris holds a lot of weight in the community for Linux gaming. It's great to see them actually come out there and, put their foot down as well, backing the players up here. Personally, I would never touch one of these games, but I get that some people, because it's EA, like this game specifically and love to play it. So if you are on Linux and you choose to do so, just know your account may be banned, and all the loot crates that you paid way too much money for will also be lost to you as well. So next time you're looking for a game, if it says EA, avoid it at all costs.
So up this week on the Software Spotlight, we've got an alternative to your usual media player or your usual MP3 player. We've talked about in the past QMMP and all of the other Clementines and Lollipop and all sorts of other applications, but you can actually play your music quite well from the terminal. So CMUS music player for the terminal. Features include gapless playback, replay gain support, MP3 and OGG streaming from Shoutcast or Icecast, playlist support and powerful playlist filters, play the queue, file browser. You can send your stuff to Last.fm or Libra.fm, several different view modes, color themes, and VI-like keyboard shortcuts. Now, I didn't actually get a chance to use this week, but I'm going to have a go because there's a gentleman in the Telegram groups, I think Linux Paul, who uses nothing but the CMUS music player.
I love it.
He's got some great choices in music, and he just sits there and he fires it up and he has it in a corner, and he doesn't have to worry about the GUI crashing or you hogging all that memory because it's a simple terminal application. So someone who's actually used it here, how has your experience been?
So I've been playing with this week, and some of these applications that you play with in the terminal, it's one of those things where they could be kind of hokey. There's no real reason for them, and yes, you could make the argument that this could fall into that category too, but there's just something about this player that it has all of these advanced features that you can get to within the terminal. And because it has VI keyboard shortcuts, if you're one of those people like me that I don't get to work in VI all day long or Vim and memorize all of these shortcuts, I basically have to force myself to go in there to work on something because my day job, I don't do Linux every day. So having something where I get into the terminal, utilize some of the VI shortcuts to run things, open file managers, browse different areas of the music. To me, it was just a lot of fun to play with. It's a fun project. That's what it's for. And I've enjoyed the heck out of it.
Yeah, I used to use it as my main media player or music player back in the day. It's very powerful. It's very featureful. It is incredibly fast and efficient because it's a terminal application. But of course, it's a terminal application, so it doesn't look that great. So it depends on what you're kind of looking for. But I think that CMUS is a fantastic music player if anybody wants to, check it out.
Staying with the CLI functionality of the episode, did you know that you can adjust the external monitor brightness display right from your command line with DDCUTL? It's a utility that will allow you to adjust the brightness of external monitors. Now, you might say to yourself, why would you want to do that? And the answer, of course, is when you connect your laptop to an external monitor when you're sitting down for the night, and all of a sudden the monitor comes on. It's a nice 27-inch 4K display that you buy, and boom, right in front of your face, white, bright light. You're like, do you really want to go into the control panel and open this thing up and click on the monitor and then, or would you just like to map a hotkey to a given little script that just lowers your monitor? And you can.
I want to map a hotkey.
Exactly. And you know what? You're going to be so proud of me, Ryan. This came from archlinux.org. So the DDCCI, the display data channel command interface, can be used to connect external monitors implementing the monitor control command set, or MCCS, over I2C DDC. There's a lot of acronyms here.
Super
the point
simple.
Is you can.
Sounds like you're reading from the Arch Wiki.
Here's the bottom line. You can put some magical incantations into the little command thingy, and the brightness will change in your monitor. That's what we all need to know. And that's your tip and trick this week. And that's pretty cool.
A quick question on that then. How does that differ from, and how much better is that from the XR&R output, your monitor name, minus brightness, 0.7? Because that will then reduce your brightness by 30%.
I wonder if it doesn't do the same thing.
Well, does that interface with external monitors, Sep?
Yes.
Yes.
No,
absolutely.
I know Noah's does, but I don't know if.
No, the minute you connect it, XR&R will know that you've got your laptop monitor and you've got another monitor.
Yeah, but you've got to run the command of which one. You have to find out what it's named then,
yeah,
right?
and it's simply XR&R.
Yeah.
So you run XR&R. Well, the same as you're going to have to know from Noah's thing, which monitor are you going to reduce? So with the XR&R command, you literally say output this terminal with this brightness setting, and it literally reduces the screen in front of you by whatever percentage you put in.
This, you do the same thing. It looks like it's very similar. You basically will put DDCUTIL, and then you could put, set VCP to 10 or 70 or whatever you want the value to be.
Nice. I'll have to check this out.
So a big thank you to each and every one of you for watching or listening to Destination Linux. If you want a behind the scenes pass into the making of this show and see Michael yelling at us for all those people that think Michael's so nice, if you want to see why he is not so nice, then you need to become a patron. You have the opportunity to chat with us live. Consider becoming a patron and keep the show going. You get perks like access to the live recordings. And if you can't show up to the live recordings, you also get unedited versions of the show that you can watch at your leisure. The best part is you could join for just a few dollars a month on Patreon or Sponsus.
Destination Linux Network also has a new way for you to become a part of the network by going to our destinationlinux.network page and joining our forums and Mumble servers. You can even become a part of the community even. While you're there, you can check out all of our shows that are part of the network, like the new DLN Extend podcast, where they take the hottest topics and do a deep dive, providing different perspectives and additional insight into the topics covered on the show, like DL throughout the week.
So please get back to us and provide some feedback or ask questions you may have. There are numerous methods you can do this. We have email, comments@destinationlinux.org, our Telegram group, our Discord, Discourse, Twitter, Mastodon, and other ways that you can find us on our website, destinationlinux.org/contact. So please keep the comments and questions coming. We love to read them and hear of ways we might be able to improve the show. Don't forget to join our Mumble server, chat with the community, set up gaming sessions, and enjoy the networking.
And if you want more content from us, the fun doesn't stop here. We also have our own channels that you can check out. You can check out content from Ryan by going to youtube.com/DasGeek, where he fills your brains on hardware, software, and all things Linux. You can check out Zeb's content, where he sometimes does 24-hour streams, but he's saying that he won't ever do it again. But it's possible. We're gonna convince him at some point. But he also does live streaming for his Euro Truck Simulator 2 stuff and some other games on his Zebedee Gaming YouTube channel. So you might want to check that out. He also might have the occasional Gentoo stream. And you can check out my content by going to tuxdigital.com, where I do a weekly in-depth Linux news podcast called This Week in Linux and other Linux-related content. I almost said tux my stool or tux digistool. I almost said that. I'm gonna have to edit it. It'll work.
Whoever did tuxmystool.com, that's brilliant.
Like I got it all out, but
I wish it had been me, so it wasn't this week. So well done, Noah.
Oh, that must have been Noah.
Yeah, I almost got it out. Like I finished the actual piece before I started laughing, but it's like I don't know if you noticed. I was close.
Tux my stool.
So anyway,
that's so bad.
All right.
No, you can't go yet. I'm gone again.
It's so rare. It's so rare for Zeb to lose it. It's just fantastic when he does.
Yeah, when Zeb joins in our childish banter, that's when we know we won.
We know we won.
Right.
All right.
You might have to adjust the red hue.
And Noah hosts his own weekly talk radio show at 6 p.m. Central on Tuesdays. You can join him and call in and he'll answer your questions about Linux or stools, all kinds of stuff. And also be sure to like that smash button and share the show on social media.
Everybody have a great week, and remember that the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye now.
I hope you get stool questions.
That's gonna be.
I'm not gonna lie. I'd be highly disappointed if I didn't get a stool.
I'm gonna call in next week. So, what kind of stool do you recommend?
I will have an answer for you if you do.